Welcome. I'm the professor, Dr. Chris McCusker. Welcome to another episode in the Quarantine Management Institute, where we are learning to learn in new ways together. This episode concerns some guidance, some advice for leading in a crisis. The advice comes from my understanding of literature on crisis leadership in psychology, and also some experiences, some cases that I was able to study closely. I'm going to summarize some of what we learned from those cases and also maybe mention a couple other things. I'd like to share with you six ideas for leading through a crisis such as the COVID-19 pandemic. The first would be to take charge. If you're in charge, you have to take charge. We saw this, a great example of this with Scott Cowan at Tulane. He came to my class once at the Freeman School of Business there, talking to students of leadership, and he made it very clear that when you are in charge, you have to take charge in a crisis. People are disoriented, and they're looking for you to orient them to the challenges ahead, the tasks, and then also orient them to each other. You've got to give meaning. You've got to be the one who's in charge. We all feel better when somebody's in charge. Some interesting research has been done on crisis leadership in teams in Afghanistan. This work was done by Colonel Tom Kolditz at West Point, who studied military units in Afghanistan. And his research showed, I think, a very interesting finding, that in a crisis situation, we care about one thing, pretty much only one thing when it comes to our leaders. And he studied in extremis or life-threatening situations. And Colonel Tom Kolditz came and gave a talk that I thought was a terrific presentation of his findings. And what he found was that competence, the competence of the leader. We need a leader, and we need that leader to be competent. That doesn't mean you have to get everything perfect, but it means you have to be in charge. And if you put yourself in front, that's reassuring, and it suggests that you're a competent leader. If you don't know what you're doing, and you give the impression that you're unsteady, unsure of yourself, lacking confidence, that's going to have a worsening effect on the team, according to Tom's research. So we want leaders who are confident and competent in a crisis. When you're in charge, take charge. Be that person who's there. Come around, everybody. We're going to get through this. Next, you want to form a team. Scott Cowan at Tulane said that this was one of the most important things he realized in a crisis situation, that you need to form a team. And he pointed out that not everybody who is a leader in the organization before the crisis turns out to be an effective member of the crisis team. You need to look for people who are good in the crisis, who are managing the stress well, who are able to make a tough decision, who are able to withstand criticism, because you're going to be criticized. We'll talk more about that. But you want to number one, take charge. Number two, form a crisis leadership team. People who can help you identify problems and decisions, and also give you advice if needed on those problems and decisions. When it comes to decisions, number three, you need to take them. Make decisions. Don't be on the fence. Don't waffle. Don't waver. Make the decisions that need to be made. In the case of Scott Cowan, he made three important decisions that saved Tulane University. Number one, we're going to reopen in January. Number two, faculty and staff are going to be paid. Number three, students are going to go somewhere, and wherever they go in the fall, they're going to get credit that applies to their Tulane degree, but they're not allowed to enroll. Everybody came back in January. Tulane led the recovery of the city of New Orleans, because when Tulane opened in January, that was something that was happening in the city. Until then, nothing was happening in the city except demolition and people trying to clean up. Number four, you're going to have an autocratic leadership style. Time is a big concern. And you want to make high-quality decisions. You want to make the correct decision. And you want those decisions to be implemented. And you need to involve people only to the extent that they help inform your decision. In a crisis situation, you're in charge. You're going to take charge. That's what we want to see. You're going to get some grace, if you will, when it comes to implementing your decisions. We're going to go with the leader. You're the person. You're the woman. You're the man. Your decisions are likely to be implemented in a crisis, and take them and be courageous and bold. Make the decisions that need to be made. Scott Cowan is a great example of that. Being open and transparent. We saw in the case of BP, opacity. Partly because there was culpability. I mean, they were warned and they ignored the warnings. They had gotten themselves in a situation where they had to cut costs and ignored the warnings and investments that were needed to be made to keep everybody safe. So there was motivation to be opaque and not admit mistakes. There's also unfair criticism. When you're a leader in a crisis, you're going to be unfairly criticized. You can't become defensive and make responding to criticism your entire leadership approach. You've got to ignore the criticism. You've got to know you're doing the right thing. Show your confidence. Show your boldness and your courage. Make your decisions, and be open and transparent. If you make a mistake, admit your mistake. You know, everybody can understand how information is changing. What was true 3 weeks ago is not true today. Explain what happened, why the decision was changed, what new information came in. If you make a mistake, admit your mistake and move on. Just don't make the same mistake over and over again. We don't like that. But when you admit a mistake, you're human and you're honest, and we respect that. That's competent. It's competent to admit mistakes in a crisis. It's incompetent to act like the mistake never happened. So we need honesty and competence from our leaders in a crisis. That means be open, be transparent, and admit your mistakes. Lastly, communicate. You got to communicate. Right now, for example, in the United States, President Trump is communicating every day news conferences that last hours, and I think that is a really good example. We need to communicate. We need to communicate and communicate. And when we don't communicate, you're going to be attacked by the media like Tony Hayward. You might say something that you didn't intend, and it might be misconstrued, saying that you want your life back. Under pressure from journalists who are questioning your motives, not sleeping, not taking care of yourself, and then you say something that you regret and costs you ultimately your job. You got to communicate. If you make a mistake, admit it. Not everything is going to come out perfectly, and I think leaders who are honest about, maybe I misspoke, maybe I didn't say that exactly the right way, are leaders who are more attractive than those who don't admit mistakes. And we appreciate when leaders are trying to communicate. All right, 6 pieces of advice from crisis leadership that come from different examples. Number 1, when you're in charge, take charge. Number 2, form a team of people who have expertise relevant to the problem, but also people who are able to manage the crisis situation. Not everybody can manage it. Number 3, make your decisions. Boldly make the decisions you need to make. Don't be on the fence. Don't waffle. Make the decisions. Make the call, especially those that are critical to the survival of your institution or your business or your team or your family. Number 4, you're going to have to adopt an autocratic style of leadership. You're going to have to be directive. You're going to have to be making decisions without first forming a quicker consensus. You've got to make those decisions, maybe after consulting a couple people. But be bold and be autocratic. We want the general in this situation. Number 4, be open and transparent. Don't come across as trying to hide something. If you make a mistake, admit it and move on. And lastly, communicate. As much as you can communicate, the better. Those are some ideas for leading in a crisis. Please share your story, share your questions, make comment, share, like, etc. Thank you.